I was thinking of the topic, and from a singular it went to a plural, as these things go. When first a person asked to one of the senior disciples of the Buddha in the earlier days of the Buddhist community, the monk actually thought it over, and he just gave a small, short soundbite, if you will, of the whole entire Dhamma. He said, the teacher's main teaching is, in fact, do what is good or wholesome. Abstain from doing what is not good or unwholesome. And then finally, purify the mind. When people ask as to what the teaching is, sometimes people wonder, in fact, okay, so I'm walking away from a tradition or a way of thought, and I'm going to force this new discipline, this new teaching upon my life, upon my way of thinking and my habits. And that often is not the case when we come to the Dhamma. I had one professor that I used to study here with years ago. He mentioned when we were talking about the Dhamma and the flavors that it has, the different flavors and textures that it has. He said, Chandana, Buddhism is like the kind of restaurant that you can go to at any time of the day and order any kind of food you can ever imagine. And you will be served. I thought that was cool. As we progress on the path, we start to see how it is not as much of a forcing our lives into this template of the Dhamma, as much as looking at our lives and juxtaposing the teachings and trying to see where the teachings fall into, trickle down into different areas of our lives. And just let it be. Just walk away from it and just watch and observe. Obviously, at some point or another, we need to have a good understanding of the theories. While we're actually living our lives, however, we will begin to see how they will just blend in beautifully, just like molten wax on whatever surface you can think of. The substrate will just be, draping itself on the molten wax. Just like that, the Dhamma takes its shape into the different crevasses of our own lives. Nooks and crannies get filled up, and it becomes inescapable. Beautifully so. So, in yoga, when I teach yoga, for example, I always tell the students not to force the body into the pose, into the asana. In fact, or to a point where the body starts to cringe, but negotiate the pose with the limitations and capacities of the body itself in this case. So it's not a matter of forcing the body to get into these unnatural pretzel poses forcefully. However, seeing how the body allows, there's a dance in a sense. In the same way, I invite you all to actually look at the Dhamma and the teachings that we listen to, or the readings we do, in that fashion. For example, one of the very important teachings of the Buddha is the set of Brahmaviharas. Brahmaviharas have come to us they were translated in English and took the shape of the immeasurables or the divine abidings. Let's break up the word into its pieces. Brahma comes from the Indian subcontinents and the Aryan philosophies of a god, of a supreme god. And later on, when Buddhism came along, the Buddha actually elaborated on that and told that, in fact, there's several Brahmas. And in fact, they're not eternal. They are just divine beings with a lifespan that starts and finishes. That's that part, the metaphysical part of it, or the philosophical background of that, we'll discuss some other time. However, the point that I want to make is the Brahmaviharas are qualities, realms to be experienced while we're living in this body, in this shape. In our thoughts, in our words, and in our actions. Those are the basis, the columns, the beams that actually support our practice. Our practice of being Buddhists. After all, that's just a title, but the important thing is how well do we mesh the principles into our own lives? You know, there were a few mentions of the breath meditation in the whole Tripitaka. What's traditionally called the 84,000 teachings of the Buddha have only a few mentions in those entire pages of the breath. In contrast to the loving kindness or the Brahmavihara meditations, which is truly eye-opening. Because we are relational beings. Relational because we're social. We are forced in one way or the other to live with other human beings. Well, the first one, the first candidate, or the first person, in fact, is ourselves, the person we see in the mirror. So how can we relate the teachings of the Buddha with ourselves and society at large? So the Buddha ingeniously came up with the Brahmaviharas, the practice of which gives the person, the practitioner, the experience of being godlike, a divine entity, while living in this flesh and blood. Now, how so? What are these Brahmaviharas? Well, there are namely four: Metta, Karuna, Mudita, and Upekkha. In English, roughly translated, Metta is love, loving kindness. Some teachers have translated it as loving friendliness. But in essence, there is love. There's lots of it. The second one is Karuna, which is compassion. And the third one is Mudita. Mudita means altruistic joy, sympathetic joy. And then the fourth one is Upekkha. In Sanskrit, it's Upekkha, which means the sense of balanced, unperturbed equanimity. So, traditionally, a practitioner is taught to start with metta, which is in essence what it all falls back into. It's not a series of words that we necessarily have to say, however, that brings about metta. Metta starts with an actual, real-time experience of love. So it is, in a sense, quite self-generated. Now, how do we come about doing this? The technique that some teachers help students practice and discover this and the other Brahmaviharas is by going back to oneself and preferably a genuine experience of love. of really unconditional love that we've felt at one point or another. Maybe it was this morning, maybe it was way back from our childhood. But something that was so warm, so fuzzy, right here in the center of your chest. It's inescapable. It's undeniably there. So innocent, but so full of life, of color, of texture, of flavor. So we start from there. Instead of the generic of us sitting down and saying, may I be well, may I be well, may I be well, like repeating it like a mantra, which, as all of us know, doesn't work, especially when we come to that moment in the day when it's so hard to keep that, given the conditions that we're in. And the Buddha, being such a pragmatic, such a practical individual, he could only give things that people could utilize and benefit from. And what better way than actually applying it through metta, through love. And then once we've actually generated that, experienced that feeling within ourselves first, we think of someone who's very close to us. And eventually expand that. So we can even do it indirectionally. So in directional manner. So we can look forward and just generate it in that direction for a little while. Which is basically a practice, a technique of stabilizing, giving a sense of intention to the mind. Because ultimately everything starts with the mind, right? And then once we felt comfortable with this direction, we switch over. We go to the side. It doesn't really matter if it's to the right or to the left. And then once we've done about the same amount of time in that direction, we switch over. And then finally to the behind us, and then to above, and zenith and nadir. And then eventually you'll become so adept at this that you actually generate, just the thought of it, all of a sudden you start radiating loving kindness like a sphere that keeps expanding, just like a supernova explosion. And it's all up to you as far as much as, when we talk about how far you can actually send it out. Nobody escapes your love. Think of it as such. Nobody, nothing. No time, no space. Sound, for example, does not get to be transported in a vacuum. Light, however, does. That's what we learned from electromagnetic spectrum and research done, right? However, that's not the case with love. It's all over the place. It's all, the energy has to do with you. How much energy are we putting into this? Interestingly enough, the practice of metta, and as we progress within it, also leads us to experience the first jhana. Jhanas are not something that are left in the Tipitaka, that are there for unique individuals or somebody who has to be practicing meditation for 40 years or so. That's not the case, folks. Everyone in this room has the capacity to experience jhanas. They're there. And the wonderful thing is, with the practice of metta, we have that opportunity. Metta is one of the ways that we can experience jhana. Another one would be the breath meditation, for example. However, because we're talking about the Brahmaviharas, we're dwelling more on metta. Now, the second one, which invariably occurs as the meditator goes and reaches that state of fullness, is like those glasses that are placed, like you've seen them in movies, where you have glasses that are like a pyramid that are placed, and you pour some liquid from the top and it starts trickling down, filling up all the way to the brim, and then it starts filling up. The same way one starts experiencing karuna, which is compassion. At that point, the walls that separate us from other human beings, that separateness, that sense of separateness between ourselves and the other, the intentions, the goals that we have, the feelings that we experience, the sense of fulfillment that we want with the experience of this thing called life, no longer becomes so isolated. What I'm trying to say is, the needs of the other individuals around us, other beings, they don't even have to be human, become as important as our own. And we feel for the other individuals, no matter what color they are, no matter what background they're from, what they look like. Do they have 2 legs versus 4 versus no legs? Wings? No wings? Other beings? It doesn't matter anymore. We don't see it anymore. Those differentiations do not become so present in our experience. And that corresponds to some degree to the second jhana. And then as the cup gets filled up, the third level, the third Brahmavihara kicks in, which is sympathetic joy, altruistic joy. You know, sometimes we've wanted to attain certain things, goals and achievements, yet we've always, sometimes, some of us, we try to reach for that. We've worked for it for so long, and we try to reach for it, and they're unattainable. Yet, you see someone who has not even tried, hasn't even lifted a finger, and boom, they're there. They attain it. They experience it. They have it. Now, a person who is experiencing the third jhana, which in this case is mudita, is someone who looks at that individual and is just full of love, joy, and this feeling of, I'm so happy they attained it, they achieved it. There is no difference between us having attained it versus them having attained it. Their joy, their happiness becomes our own. Now, this is not something that we are struggling against our own leanings or habitual patterns to fight against, saying, no, that's bad if I feel angry. How come they got it and we didn't? No, I have to bring about sympathetic joy. It's not anything like that. This flows out of our hearts. This is real that's occurring. So there is no forcefulness. Remember the yoga analogy I made earlier. We're not forcing anything into us, into our mind. Remember, everything starts with the mind, right? That's the first verse of the Dhammapada. Like the ox leading the cart wheel is always going to come after the ox. So do good things that we do, or wholesome acts, and unwholesome acts always are preceded by the mind. So this is a very wholesome activity that we're engaged in, the Brahmaviharas. And trickling down even further into the fourth stage, or fourth level of Brahmaviharas, we come across this state of calmness that pervades everything we experience, no matter what it is. The mind is in this state of stillness, and it's totally unforced. But it does rely on the other 3 Brahmaviharas. It was there from the start, however, it was so faint, even when we were experiencing the metta, working on that. It was there, but it was still not as strong. Now it becomes to the forefront of experience. And that is upekkha, which is equanimity. Keeping or maintaining a state of balance no matter what conditions we're surrounded by. That's not easy. Especially when we think of life in this day and age, how difficult it is to even take a step outside our door and not be confronted with conditions and set of situations that really, really challenge us. We want to think things that are unwholesome. We want to say things that are unwholesome, and we want definitely to do things that are unwholesome. So the Brahmaviharas are not something necessarily that we engage in while we're sitting. So I invite you to bring those Brahmaviharas back into the world, the real test ground, the real laboratory of life, where real experience does take place and life takes place. It's not something forced. However, it does require some intentional activity, whether it's mental activity, verbal activity, or physical activity, for us to start the drive. You know, I once studied back in, wow, it's been almost like 17, 20 years. In the local mountains here in Los Angeles, I took a course in how to survive in the wild. So outdoor skills. There's a very interesting gentleman, very knowledgeable and talented. His name is Christopher Nirgis, and he taught me how to start a fire. If I'm caught in the wild and it's cold, I need to make fire for the night. So you start with the tiniest little frictions that we make. Either it's, there's also the cheating way of doing it, which is magnesium, but that's a different story. But just rubbing two pieces of dry wood together in a certain way, at a certain angle, leaving enough room for the air to the air current to go in from a certain angle. It requires such patience and deliberate, intentional action in a certain way, in a certain fashion, for a certain time period. But once we do that, and you see the white smoke come out, just gently, and then you start putting tiny little embers, tiny little pieces of maybe even cotton, or if you have it, or some tissue, napkin, anything that's so soft. And then you add a little bit heavier material, maybe some dry grass, dry leaves, and then finally you get some tiny little twigs and you put that in there. All throughout the time your eyes are on it, making sure you're not going to blow it away. Just make all that work go away. Finally, you have a fire which is going to keep you warm at night. It requires effort. Everything requires effort. For you even to be sitting here and listening requires effort. However, there is life in that effort, but we're getting this glider all the way up, and then it's going to take off on its own. However, we do need to think about sila, samadhi, and panya. We're after wisdom. Bringing metta into your own life inevitably brings about a state of understanding and wisdom that was not there previously. Things that used to bother us previously do no longer have that effect on us, which is wonderful. And then you'll start seeing how equanimity actually plays along with the fabric of life. You cannot avoid seeing how it's weaved with all of the intricacies that we feel in our daily thoughts and feelings and interactions with people. And life becomes not just more tolerable, but enjoyable. And then you start to see there's a quality that's added to this. You did not force anything in a sense, however, you're seeing, you're understanding. You know, one of the qualities or characteristics of the Dhamma is ehipassiko. In Pali it means come over here and see and test it out yourself. Practice it. See if it's, the test, as they say, it's in the pudding. Fruit, yes, thank you very much. The proof is in the pudding, right? 2,600 years ago, the Buddha actually invited us to do that. And it's quite a remarkable achievement for us to experience this. Not at a certain time in the future, but I invite you all to actually try to see if you can actually generate that metta now even. I can see it on your faces right now. There's this sense of relaxation, a lack of tension. And by the way, that tells a lot. When you're sitting down and meditate, or even during the day when you're driving, the moment you feel frowning, the moment you feel some tension, remember, everything starts in the mind. If you hold that tension in the brain, it's going to affect the body. No wonder we have so much stress and so many cases of cancer in life today, which is mind-boggling. So many of us hold so much stress within us, and it starts from here. So notice if you're actually tightening up your facial muscles and just relax them. Start with the area between your eyebrows. Sometimes when I'm giving meditation retreats, it's kind of, I want to come around and just tap people in the forehead, just, like, relax. The Buddha always said, we are the happy ones. What does that mean? We are the happy ones. This is a man who actually did 6 years of intense meditation work, of just ascetic, torturous practice. He saw that never got him anywhere. I mean, there's even, it's mentioned in the Tripitaka where he's saying, you could actually see my skeleton, my backbone from the front. His eyes had sunk in so deep that they looked like deep wells. I mean, he had gone right there. There was a tiny little sliver of a space between him alive and him dead. He was right there. And then he saw that it never really got him any spiritual awakening or insight. That's why this path is called the middle path. Middle path. Living in this world, seeing where everything falls without being attached to our fears, to our tensions. And that's what it means when you're letting go of the tension. No, it's my tension. It's my tension. I worked hard for this. No, but you don't understand. This is important, a set of conditions, and I have to be tense. No, you don't. Laugh it off and still maintain that intentional awareness and that observation to maintain the integrity of every single moment, which is going to happen only once. Life happens only once, and it's happening every millisecond. That's why there is this constant state of newness occurring. Newness. No moment is like the moment that passed before it. Think about that. So if we've done some bad things, and we've all done a lot of bad things, I know I have. But if we cling to the past, that's going to maintain this idea of an identity, of the personal self that's going to go through it. But there is no such thing. That's what life is giving us at every single moment that we live, of just letting go of every single moment, but living it truthfully, fully, with metta, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, as best as we can. And if we don't live those moments in such a way, that's okay too. Relax. Just remind yourself to come back to it and live your day. Relax. But maintain that, I had one teacher, a Tibetan, Geshe Gyaltsen, he was associated with this temple too. He told me one time, the very important part of maintaining a meditative lifestyle is like these beams that we see here that hold up the roof, the ceiling, these straight beams. And maintaining that intentional awareness, that determination, is like those very determined straight lines. However, you can do anything that you want in between those spaces. And that is what the intention is in us wanting to maintain that state of awareness throughout the day. And the Brahmaviharas are simply tools that allow us to maintain that with a softer touch, with opening instead of just being isolated into tiny little islands of me, mine, this is who I am, delusion. Just opening up, no borders. It's very porous when you think of it, this sense of identity. I invite you guys to investigate that a little bit more. Thank you, and if you have any questions, please. Do we have time, Bhante?
Yeah, we have time.
Excellent. So, if there are any questions...
So we have a time, 10 minutes.
I usually go over. This time I decided to cut it off just ever so slightly.
If you have any questions, please ask.
Okay, I'll ask a question. So the way you talked about the Brahmaviharas, I thought was interesting because you talked to them in relationship to different jhanas. It's like, I'm not sure if I've heard that before, but so when you're in these different states of absorption, different jhanas, is it kind of like you're experiencing the Brahmaviharas, or are you looking at it more in terms of, for example, like the fourth frame of reference when you're looking at different dhammas? So is it more kind of like experiencing the four Brahmaviharas in different states, or is it looking at kind of like more in the fourth frame of reference?
In both cases, there's a sense of awareness and observation that is unmistakable. It's just like seeing tiny little ripples show up on the surface of the ocean, on the horizon. You're completely aware of it. You're going through it. You're experiencing it. But there's this sense of detachment. You're observing it. You're observing, for example, what happens in the first jhana or second or third or fourth jhana. You note, especially in the first three, but there's a gradient. In the first jhana, there's a tremendous experience of joy. That's the one experience, which is very pleasant. There's three types of feeling: pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, and neutral feelings. So what's occurring is, in some form, some teachers explain it in a way where the jhanas themselves are leading you to a state of neutral feeling. That's one way. Other teachers have explained it that it is in fact a pleasant experience, in a sense, when you look at it. However, coming back to your question, you're observing these sensations that come in, and then you notice that this is not mind-made. You're not bringing this about by sheer mental imaginings. You literally feel it throughout your body, and as if the pores of your skin just open up, and they're just like